Welcome. Today I'd like to talk about St. Louis de Marillac. She is the co-founder of the Daughters of Charity, and we'll talk about that in a second. She's born in 1591. She was raised by her widowed father, who was a distinguished country gentleman. But when she was 15 years old, he dies, and she's in a very precarious situation in terms of her social status. So to resolve this, they encouraged, and she went along with marrying a gentleman named Anthony Grasse. He was secretary to the household of the French queen, and with him she bore a son, and it seemed like they had a fairly happy marriage. But she suffered anxiety. She had this feeling like she should have been a religious and just wasn't. She felt like she had a vocation, and she just didn't feel it. And then, lo and behold, not too long after that, he gets sick, her husband, and she nurses him for, I think it's almost a year. And when he passes, and even before he passed, she thought, I'm not going to do this marriage thing again. This is not my game. This is not my gig. So she just goes off and tries taking time alone and spends a lot of time alone and solitary, and then ends up meeting a Father Vincent de Paul, who she asked to have him be her spiritual director, and he agreed. Now, this Vincent de Paul, or he's known as Monsignor Vincent, had a whole lot of charitable projects going, and he got a whole raft of women who would work part-time in helping the poor in a variety of different ways. And so she thought, this is pretty good. So she tried it out, and she was doing it, and she just felt so much better about herself and everything. But she thought, I just don't know about doing this on a part-time volunteer basis. It seems like something more. So she met with Vincent, and the two of them came up with the idea of a community of women that'd be totally committed to loving service of the poor. And thus, that was the beginning of the Daughters of Charity. Now, in the beginning, they didn't think of this as a religious order at all. They thought much more about, and I think it was Vincent that Monsignor Vincent put it this way. He said, your convent will be the house of the sick, your cell, a hired room, your chapel, the parish church, your cloister, the streets of the city, or the wards of the hospital. Your enclosure, obedience. Your grating, the fear of God. Your veil, holy modesty. In spite of the fact that they were kind of like this whole new age of not religious, but trying to be totally dedicated to connecting with God through service of the poor. In doing this, they really didn't see themselves as sisters or nuns. They saw themselves as really committed to this cause, but they were approved as a religious community, and so over time they kind of took on some of that. And the outfits they wore, I think it was a gray top and the gray habit, so it was a white with a white headdress, and they're recognized for that. But at the time they were doing this, that's how peasant women dressed. So they just dressed like peasant women and served them. They constantly had to be reminded, the sisters did, that their spiritual masters were the poor, that they were to see Christ in the poor. The numbers of gals that joined her in this venture, in St. Louis's venture, it expanded quite a bit. And there was a major plague in Paris at that time during her life, and she served trying to heal them up and everything else. And she was a great leader. And known to have a certain amount of wisdom. She did have concern about her son. She had a son with her husband, and he was a little bit on the slow side. And she had this great idea that he should be a priest. Well, Father Vincent had to convince her that, listen, this doesn't seem to be a call that he hears, so you can't make him hear that as a call. So she let that go, and he went off, and he got married and became a clerk. And it's interesting, they don't say a lot about it, but he doesn't rejoin her until she's almost on her deathbed. So you get the feeling like there's been some separation there that maybe wasn't as good as it could have been. None of us are perfect. And yet her biggest concern was the fact that the sisters would become like an institution. she said, these daughters are used for the salvation and comfort of their neighbor. They are to serve the poor. Honor them, my children, as you would honor Christ himself. She had hoped that Vincent would come on her deathbed when she was there, where her son and family were there. But he couldn't. He was older. He wasn't well himself. And he said, listen, he sent a message saying, listen, I will see you in heaven. And the truth is, we all will. But if we want to see Christ today, we need to see him in the poor and in serving the poor. It's an interesting thought. How will I do that today? This is a good start. Let us consider.